Welcome to the Lexy Show, fashion that gives a damn. This week I am joined by the co-founder of Mo.Na Gems. Please join me in extending a warm welcome to Mecca McDonald. So, Mo.Na Gems started in a college dorm kitchen. Can you take us back to that moment? What were you experimenting with, and what made you think maybe this could actually be something?
So, for context, I got this idea while I was in college still, and it was also the pandemic. So, we didn't really have access to lab space because of the pandemic. And I went to Johns Hopkins, so we had state-of-the-art equipment and all that stuff, but we couldn't use it. Instead of focusing on the limitations of what we didn't have access to, me and I were inspired to just use what we had and just keep going. I think when I had the idea originally, I just felt strongly that it was a good idea. I was like, this just feels like a really good idea and I want to pursue it. And then we just made a lot of progress and we actually got a material that worked. And that was really exciting.
That's awesome. As horrible as COVID was, I think I've spoken to a lot of people that we sat at home for so long and we had nothing to do. And we really found ways of using our resources and making the best out of a horrible situation. And so I think it's really interesting to hear of all the companies and all the adventures and just like what people did. I tried to get better at sewing during COVID times, but I definitely would not say that I did. But that is a hobby that maybe in 2026 I'm going to try to pick up again, at least very small little sewing projects. But you and your co-founder were inspired by seeing resin jewelry online, but instead of copying that, you went in the opposite direction. So, what made sustainability the starting point rather than an afterthought?
I think it's just how I grew up. I think just culturally, like my background is I'm Jamaican, and just culturally, when you're outside of America, people are a little more sustainable in terms of their consumption habits, in terms of how they make things. And it just felt, I don't know, it just felt normal. I don't really have a deep answer, but it just felt like the right thing to do. I grew up around being in nature all the time, and I just had this connection to nature, and I had this strong urge to want to protect it and create something that from that place of, oh, I want to make something that is good for the earth and good for the people living on the earth. And so that's where that inspiration came from for me.
Yeah, that's amazing. I think that is something that, again, like I've had conversations about where it's just like sustainability isn't always like these big changes that we need to make. Sometimes it's just consuming less or doing it's like things that we don't even necessarily think about all the time. I've been really into trying to waste less and seeing what I can make out of like food scraps and random things. And so literally yesterday I got these like I have like more sustainable like counter multi-purpose cleaner or
Mm.
whatever. And instead of buying the whole new plastic bottle, I buy these little like glass bottles filled with cleaning solution or whatever, and you pour it in and mix it with water. And then I was
Mhm.
looking at these little glass bottles that it comes in, and I was like, why would I get rid of these? Like I could totally use this to like store salad dressing or something when I need to go to lunch and or go into the office and need like a container for that. And I'm like just trying to think of all these ways of just not throwing things out. And again, like what you were saying, I think in America we think of it or as, oh, we're making these big switches or whatever, but like sometimes that's just how people live. And like I don't it doesn't need to be this big like switch to sustainability. It can just be like,
The norm.
yeah, the norm.
What my intention was with creating jewelry too, especially, it was like, it doesn't need to be like, oh, I have this like sustainable car or something. It could be something small, like something you can wear and interact with every day. And then also it's like a conversation starter too, because that's something people have told me like when they wear my products. People are always like, oh, where'd you get them from? Those are so cute. And then, oh my God, did you know that these are made from potatoes? Or did you know that these are biodegradable? And then it's what? How does that work? And so I think just the act of wear having something that you can wear that communicates, oh, I really care about the earth and I want to engage with like brands and companies that also care about the earth, I think is really cool. And I think I also just wanted to challenge people to think more deeply about the materials that they interact with. I think we have this perspective that things are just like set in stone, right? But that's just not true. Like things are constantly changing and we have the power to change things just by putting our ideas out there.
Yeah, completely. So how did you discover that potatoes might actually be the solution?
There's layers to that answer, but I think the simplest answer is I just wanted to try potatoes. I was like, why not, basically. But like a more like nerdy answer is my long-term goal is to like I would love for this material to have multiple applications and more applications than just jewelry. Like it's my dream to work with a makeup brand and make their packaging from this material. And the intention behind picking potatoes that it's an abundant material and millions of tons of potatoes are wasted and thrown away. And so in terms of building infrastructure around this material, the input ingredient already exists on a large industrial scale. It wouldn't be too much of a challenge to industrialize the process and make a plastic alternative for a makeup brand, for example. Because a lot of biomaterials, like they're trying to use feedstock that doesn't have infrastructure, so that makes it more expensive. And part of the problem with getting rid of plastic is that it's heavily subsidized by the government, so it's very cheap. And so companies don't want to switch, right? Because if they switch to a new material that's a little more expensive, that eats into their profits, it eats into their bottom line. And potatoes are abundant, and millions of potatoes are thrown away every single year just because they're too ugly for consumption. So that's also why I thought potato.
That is so cool. So like when you tell people like, hey, this is made out of a potato, what's usually their reaction? Do they think that's sick or
Yeah, they're like, what? Like, there was like, how does that work? Like, I think it invokes like curiosity. They have a lot of questions. They're amused. They're like, what? Like, how did you come up with this? And they're like, what? It actually looks just like plastic. Like, I just want to show you that I like made this fish. Look at this. It literally, you can see the texture on it. Like,
Yeah, that straight up looks like plastic.
cool. No, yeah. So people always they just get really excited and it makes me happy because obviously I'm excited about it. This is what I'm spending my time doing. And yeah, they just get really excited and they're really like they just have so many questions and I think it's really cool.
I think that's like half of the sustainable journey is like not half quite the exaggeration, but I love when people are like, "Oh, like I like your blah blah blah," and then I'm like, "Thanks. It's made out of like 10 recycled water bottles, or it's made out of potatoes, or I thrifted it." And then people are like, "Really? That's so cool." It's like changing the narrative around what sustainability is, because I feel like still a lot of people have this
I
connotation with sustainability that's ugly.
Yeah, that's also why I started this brand is because I was like sustainability is just absolutely so ugly. Like I'm a visual artist and obviously I like when things are pretty. And I was like, why is sustainability branded in this one specific way? You know what I mean? It's like gray, beige, neutrals, like
Yeah.
browns, which obviously makes sense like when you think about the earth and like earth tones in nature, but I was like if we want this to be the norm, if we want this to be something that people are actually excited about, it also has to be pretty, right? Like it also has to fit into people's everyday lives. And that was also something we thought about when we were designing the materials. Like it can't look sustainable, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think that is like a misconception that I'll talk about a lot, where it's like sustainability is ugly. And I'm just like, literally, shut your mouth. Sustainability is hot.
Shut your mouth. No,
Like,
sustainability can be cool, you know what I mean? It can be like quirky, like it can be fun and expressive.
Yeah. I think that's just, oh my God, I was getting my hair cut the other day and I was talking to the person about what I do and sustainability or whatever. And they cut my hair and they were like, yeah, this is like super granola. And I was like, what the hell? Like, not no diss to granola. I'm vegetarian. I love to hike, but like I also am a fashion girly. It doesn't have to be one or the other. Like you can intertwine the fashion and the sustainability. And I think the more that we can get that across by doing those things where it's like, hey, I like your necklace, and you're like, hey, it's made from potatoes. That really
Right.
starts the conversation. And I think having those like natural conversations is so important.
No, literally, it's just like people like I just my intention is I want it to look like classic, like obviously, like I want it to just look like what we already have so that people are excited about it and excited about integrating it into their lives because as humans fundamentally, like I also studied psychology, but like we just are attracted to things that are beautiful and things that we perceive as beautiful. So that's also when I was designing this material was just considering if I'm just like a regular everyday person and I don't care about sustainability, how can I make someone care? That's through intentional design and also science. But yeah.
Yeah, completely. So where'd the inspiration for the name come from?
So obviously, like I'm passionate about science, right? Like I went to Johns Hopkins and I created a biomaterial. So a lot of people don't really, obviously, they don't really see it at first. Like it's like obvious to me, but it's modeled after the periodic table, right? So when you look at the periodic table of elements, you can see like everything is abbreviated like this. So the name Mo.Na is Mother Nature, but abbreviated like the periodic table.
Oh my gosh. Wait, I'm obsessed with that. Wow, I love that. That's so fun. How did you just were like looking at the periodic table one day and you're like, this is it?
I don't know really how I came up with it. I think I was just like, what should I name this? What should I name this? And I think for me, like I went to Johns Hopkins, right? And I'm also an artist, but I think a lot of us perceive art and science as separate, as oh, like science over there, art over there. But I see them, I think they go hand in hand, and I think they should be bridged more often. So I was like, how do I combine creativity with science? So that
Mhm.
was my intention.
I love that. I think that is so cool. And I think that there are probably, and so many people that I've spoken to on my podcast or just in day to day where they're, again, interested in the science aspect of it all. But that's another thing that I'm like, science can be cool, science can be sexy. Like, I think that it's so cool that we live in 2026. And this is something I'll talk about a lot, where it's like a lot of things that we do for sustainability are going back to the way we used to do things, but it's also awesome that we live in an age that we're able to make these cool things and have these access to these different like technologies and sciences in order to make sustainability so interesting and hopefully more accessible. And so I think that is really cool. And I feel like probably a lot of people can relate to being fashionable and being whatever, but also having that like nerdy side to them. And so I think that I just love that name. I think it's very smart.
Yeah.
So you get probably classic questions like, will it fall apart? Will it melt? Will it grow, mold? What's some of the like biggest misconceptions people have about biodegradable materials?
Yes, so obviously education in America is not the best. So when people hear that something is biodegradable, they're like, oh, so it's like worthless. Like it's not durable, it's fragile. It's basically they're like it's a piece of shit. And I'm like wood, for example, is biodegradable. You know what I mean? Because it comes from trees, right? It's just been dried and cured in a specific way. The human body is biodegradable, but we're not walking around falling apart, right? Growing mold. There's like a
Good
specific,
point. Good point.
Right. And so I always use the analogy of, okay, think of the human body. We're biodegradable, but you're not going to start decomposing until you're in a specific condition that allows for the decomposition, right? That's in the soil, moisture, tiny microorganisms that eat organic matter. So the material operates the same way when it's out and about in the world. It's chilling. It's not growing mold. It's been plasticized using natural materials. So it acts just like plastic. But when you throw it away, when you put it in the soil, when Mother Nature does its job, it disappears. Yeah, but I think people's imaginations are like really limited for what's possible and like what can exist in the world. So they're like, oh, so it'll break down into microplastics. No, because it's not actually made from fossil fuels. It's not made from actual plastic. So I think there's a lot of miseducation around natural materials and what they can do. And that's also part of the reason why I started the series on my Instagram page and the bioplastic, just to educate people because they don't understand. Like they have so many questions, which is fine. And so, yeah, there's a lot of misconceptions around the performance of the material, if it's durable, if it'll just start falling apart. I have stuff that I made in 2020 that I still have and it's fine. You know what I mean? And it's in
Yeah.
perfect condition. But when I'm like, okay, I'm gonna put this in a dirt now, bye. Yeah.
I think that's something that we as consumers and we as brands and everyone needs to be thinking like this end of life for our pieces and what are we going to do when we no longer want this thing? Because I think that if we think of that ahead of time, I don't know, I think that with the rise of like fast fashion and micro trends and all these things, it's just let's buy something and then let's throw it out. And it's, I mean, that's a large part of the problem. And so I think that when we think of something and we're like, okay, how many times am I going to use this? And how many times am I going to wear it? And then when I wear it, what can I do can I extend the end of life? Can I repair the holes that are in this piece? Or can I turn it into a rag or whatever? And then with that, what am I going to do from there? Like before ever throwing anything out, like how am I going to think about the end of life? And so if you're a brand and you're thinking about this, I think that is like so helpful because I think we're seeing a lot of brands that are doing like this. If you have something that an old pair of, I think Lululemon is like a brand that's doing it, where they're like, if you have an old pair of Lululemon leggings or something, you can bring it back to Lululemon and then you get like a discount or something on your next purchase. That all that to say, Lululemon is like not a very sustainable company, but a good program that they're doing. And I think that if more of these brands thought of this end of life or thought of ways of extending this, it again just brings up the topic of sustainability.
Yeah, I think it's what's really unfortunate about the older generation is that they were just so caught up on making money. They're like, yeah, their imagination stopped at the sale. You know what I mean? They're like,
Yeah.
yes, we make the product, we sell it, boom, move on. It's no, like I think as people who are in positions of power or whatever, you have a responsibility to also think about the impact that you're having on the environment, especially if you work at a multinational corporation. Like you have the most impact. And like it's really frustrating because I think, especially as young, ambitious people, we're conditioned to just, oh, I gotta figure out how to make the most money. You know what I mean? Like you go to a school like Johns Hopkins, you go to school like Harvard, Columbia, you're literally conditioned to just be like, oh, let me figure out what I can do to make the most money. But I think people should be conditioned to think about how they can make the world a better place. There's enough money in the world, there's enough resources in the world for us to be fine. Like we don't need to be making money anymore. You know what I mean? We need to be evolving as a society, as a culture, and having a positive impact on the world around us.
Yeah, completely. And I think that it's so important for like companies like yours where like you're going into it with that mindset. And I obviously encourage any brand that's not already sustainable to look into ways that they can be more sustainable. But I think that is like a big difference that I'm seeing where a lot of consumers now are pushing for sustainability and transparency. And so a lot of these brands that are not transparent and not sustainable are just like scrambling for ways that they can become sustainable and oftentimes greenwash, which again, I totally encourage any brand to do research and become more sustainable, but don't just like release like a green line. Do the research and see what you can really do. But so having companies that go into it being like, this is sustainable, this is biodegradable is so great because the more that we can make that, the more that we get that out there, the more accessible it becomes, the more that like my in an ideal perfect world, like we have the legislation that forces all brands to be sustainable, ethical, and transparent. Thus, every single brand out there is transparent, sustainable, and ethical. Thus, consumers have no choice other than to shop from brands that are sustainable, ethical, and transparent because that's all that's out there. We will get to that point, hopefully, but maybe not in my lifetime. But the more all the work that we can do now is so important. So that's why brands like yours are so important. But you started this while you were in college. What do people often underestimate about young founders in the sustainable fashion industry or just in the fashion industry in general?
I think there's a lot of misogyny, like in the fashion industry, which is so funny. Because if you look at it, a lot of the leadership in fashion in executive level positions, they're all men, right? They're like making decisions about what people should wear, whatever. And then it's like the people who are conceptualizing, the people who are starting trends, the people who are actually impacting culture, women, right? So it's like, why aren't women in positions of power? I don't know. But I think especially being a young woman in sustainability and fashion, like people are like, oh, that's cute. You know what I mean? They're like, that's cute. Like they don't think like this could actually have a long-term impact. And yeah, if I've literally tested it where like I've branded like what I'm doing in like a more masculine way, and I get like way more positive feedback from like people in positions of power, obviously. And then it's like branding it in like a cute girly pop whimsical way. That's what's resonating with like consumers and like everyday people. And it's just, I'm like, it's so interesting. I'm like, I don't know. Obviously, like it's like a cultural thing in America, but I think it is easy to be underestimated when you're a young woman and you're trying to do something that's a little more creative, but still can have a positive impact, right? Like still has potential. Because I always think, I'm always like, bro, like if I was like a white guy, like if I was just like a white man, like I just wonder like how much progress I would make with this idea. Because I'm like, this is a really good idea. You know what I mean? And
Mhm.
that's just like a question that always permeates in my mind. Like, if I wasn't a woman, like if I wasn't black, and maybe if I wasn't marketing it like for fashion, like where would I go?
Yeah. And how do you think that you've overcome this, and how can others maybe be encouraged to, when they see this happening, not succumb to it?
I think it's just like using creativity if you have an idea, and also just like awareness, right? If you have an idea and maybe it doesn't fit the mold of what typically gets funding from like larger institutions or whatever, just thinking about, okay, I have this idea, I really like this idea, and I want to stay true to this idea. How can I keep the essence of my idea, but communicate it in a way that will get support from a larger institution? Like, just and not taking it personally because it's this is hundreds-year-old systems that we're dealing with. So it's not really about you per se, but if you're able to stay true to the essence of your idea and maintain the integrity of it, the existence of your idea and the success of your idea is what will allow for things to change, right? Like you have to decide like you want to be a part of doing the hard work of promoting that change and showing that the change is possible and figuring out how you can communicate to different audiences. You just have to view it as, oh, like this audience likes is looking for this type of information. This audience is looking for this type of information, but you can still maintain the integrity of what you're building. So I think it just requires like humility, creativity, and passion.
Yes, completely. I love that. So I always like to end my podcasts on asking, what are your top tips for someone who's starting their journey to a more sustainable lifestyle?
More sustainable lifestyle. Honestly, the most sustainable thing to do is just like consume less,
Mhm.
honestly, stop buying things. But I think if you're like most Americans, we like to spend money. I think just thinking about what you're buying, where it's coming from, and thinking intentionally about how it's sourced, like how is it made, who's making it, and building the awareness around how something is getting to you is really important.
Mhm.
Because we often forget someone is making this. There's a real person behind this thing that I made, and it just magically appears. No, just spend some time thinking about that, doing research, finding brands that align with your values, and putting that out into the world.
Completely. I love that. I think that's super important. Like you said, like passion. And I think that passion like really keeps us going in this industry, especially because the environment sometimes can be really daunting and really scary. And there's a lot of stats out there that kind of keep me up at night. But I think that when we have a passion for this and a passion for fashion, haha, it keeps us motivated, surrounding yourself with people that are also passionate about it. Thank you so much. Where can people find you on social media?
People can find us on Instagram, TikTok, Pinterest, and honestly YouTube at Mona.gems, Mona period GEMS, and join our engaging community. I always share like very interesting creative content around sustainability.
Thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. While you're at it, you can follow me on my socials, my Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, or all my name at Lexy Silverstein. That's Lexy, silver like the color, Stein. And remember to live a good life and look fucking good doing it.